Good morning, everyone. We'll get started once folks are all here. All the members are here. How's everyone doing this morning?
Good, thank you, Amira.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to day 2 of the EJTF.
Chair, I'm going to go ahead and put the agenda in the chat box for the panelists and attendees.
Sounds good.
Task force members, this is Bob Collin. I want to make sure that people got the citizen letters that were sent to us this morning by Courtney. There were 2 important ones that are relative to today's discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Great. So maybe we can just quickly go around and do some intros. My name is Joel, he, him, his. Work for One Oregon and chair of the EJTF. I'll pass it over to Bob.
Bob Collin, he, him, his, retired professor, author. Good morning, everyone. It was a great day yesterday. I'll turn it over to Quinn.
Good morning. My name is Quinn Reed, and I am the Oregon Policy Director for the Center for Biological Diversity. And I'll turn it over to Ben.
Ben Duncan, Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at Multnomah County and representing the Oregon Commission on Black Affairs. Use he, him, his pronouns. I'll pass it to Jim.
This is Jim from Eastern Oregon, lovely LeGrand, and currently I'm on the management team of the Stop B2H Coalition, which is trying to organize 5 Eastern Oregon counties against the 300-mile, 500 kilovolt line. He, him, his, and looking forward to the weekend. I don't see anybody else to turn it over to. Oh, Valentin, how about you introduce?
Good morning. This is Valentin Sanchez, he, him, his, with the Oregon Law Center. And I guess I'll turn it over to Scott.
Looks like Scott still might be connecting to audio.
How about Courtney?
Hey, this is Courtney Linebaugh with the Governor's Office, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Mira?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Amira Streeter. I'm the Natural Resources Policy Advisor to Governor Kate Brown. Pronouns are she, her, hers. And did Ben go? Okay. I'm gonna toss it back to Joel to get us started.
Sure. Has everyone else had a chance to introduce themselves?
I haven't yet, Joel.
Go
I
ahead.
was on a little late. Thanks. Scott Dahlman, Task Force member, he, him, his. Good morning, everybody.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, in that case, we got a few things on our agenda today. We'll just go ahead and get right into business. We have emerging issues. So we've got the issue of CAFOs, and I think we have someone here from ODA to talk to us a little about CAFOs as well as Chlorpyrifos.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Christina Higby with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I'm the citizen advocate and tribal liaison, and we have two ODA staff here to present. Wim Matthews is our confined animal feeding operation manager, and he is going to be talking about the proposed permit in the Boardman area and our public process. And then after him, Rose Cachadorian is a pesticide manager, and she is going to be talking about the Chlorpyrifos rules. So with that being said, or rulemaking, with that being said, I'll have Wim Matthews start.
All right, well, good morning, members of the task force. My name is Wim Matthews. I am the confined animal feeding operation and the fertilizer programs manager with the Department of Agriculture. And I want to say thank you very much for allowing us to make this presentation to you. We look forward to comments that we would receive from it and suggestions that you may have on our outreach program. And this presentation and the activities that the agencies have undertaken are based in large part on interactions that we had with the EJTF during the Lost Valley time period. So thank you very much for those feedback activities. So I have some PowerPoint slides. I'm going to share my screen and run through those. And then if we could have questions at the end. Amir, can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear me and the volume's good? All right, thank you so much. All right, so the Easter Day Farms Dairy LLC is the name of the entity that's proposing this new CAFO to the department. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Win. We can't see your presentation if you have one showing.
Oh, okay, hang on, sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you for letting me know that.
Yes, click on the share screen and you should be able to pull that up.
Hang on a second, I'm gonna have to make one quick adjustment here.
No problem. We're all still adjusting to Zoom. By the end of this, we'll have it completely perfect. Now we can see your screen.
All right, it should be loading up the presentation now. How does that look?
Looks great.
Oh, thank you for that, appreciate it. All right, so the Easter Day Farms Dairy LLC, they're the name of the corporation, the family farm that has applied for this proposed CAFO. And we received an application into ODA, and the applicants are asking for a new large dairy CAFO, and it would be on an individual Oregon CAFO Npds permit. So Npds is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. So those are federal Clean Water Act permits. It's important to note that this permit can only regulate this operation for water quality issues, for surface and groundwater quality. By statute, it can't include things like animal welfare or air quality or other things that may be happening on this facility. It's located, the location is currently already there. It's located on about 7,000 acres of land that's southeast of Hermiston, Oregon. And this facility, this location was purchased from the estate of the former Lost Valley Dairy that we had permitted previously. And the dairy filed bankruptcy, and the agencies worked together to get the facility decommissioned, cleaned up, and the Lost Valley entity is now completely out of the picture. So some specifics about the application itself is they're requesting that there be a dairy there and also a beef feedlot. So there's two different types of operations going on, and a total of 28,300 head of cattle. The dairy side of the operation would have 9,700 mature milking cows and 8,600 dairy heifers and calves. And the beef side of the operation would have 10,000 beef feeders. And these are up to numbers. This is the maximum amount of numbers they could have there. On that 7,000 acre site, there are 5,700 acres of that are currently in irrigated crops. And the Easter Days do currently own that site and are currently farming it. So all of those 5,700 acres are currently in crops. There's also extensive existing infrastructure in place that's left behind from the Lost Valley estate. And I'll show a picture here next that will describe some of that. And there are existing lagoons and proposed lagoons, and those facilities that are currently there are all double lined with synthetic liners and leak detection systems. And those requirements would continue on if we're able to issue a permit for this new proposed facility. So this slide is pretty busy, and I apologize for that, but it was, I thought, the best way to take a look at the infrastructure that is there. The first thing I'll describe is in the center of that picture, the white crosshatched area is described in a permit as the production area. That's where all the animals are housed and the waste system resides and the milking activities occur. And that size of that facility, the size of that footprint there is around 400 acres, so it gives you a little idea of the scale there. And you'll see the irrigated crop circles adjacent to the facility on all four sides. If you look in the center upper left-hand end, you'll see an area that talks about lagoons and settling cells. And you can see lagoon 1, 2, 3, and 5 have a black reflection from the satellite photo. Those are facilities that were constructed by Lost Valley. They are currently lined. They are currently empty. That's why you see that reflection in that satellite photo of the black poly liners. The settling cells 1 and 2 are lined. You'll notice that settling cell 3 is really light colored. It's not lined. And neither are lagoons 4, 6, and 7. And then there are existing buildings that are there in the white, and proposed feedlot pens for dairy heifers and for those beef feeding animals, and other things on that map labeled proposed. Those could only be constructed if we're able to issue a new permit, for this activity. So again, the dairy is required to have an individual permit because it's in an environmentally sensitive area. It's in the lower Umatilla groundwater management area. And I'll talk later about the partnership that we have with the agencies. DEQ is the agency that manages the Guama. And we have a robust partnership with that agency and others as we move forward with this application. The permit regulates the dairy so that manure and processed wastewater that it generates don't discharge the surface and groundwater. And it requires that the facility prepare a nutrient management plan. That plan is a description of how all the facility operates. And so if you can remember back to the photograph, how the waste system flows, what the plumbing diagram looks in that whole facility, how the waste is generated, how it gets transported, treated, stored, and utilized throughout that whole facility. All those specifics are in the nutrient management plan. The permit limits the amount of wastewater that can be applied to the fields, and that's based on agronomic rates. They can't put on any more nutrients than the crops they propose to grow will take up. And so it's a utilization activity, it's not a disposal activity. The permit prohibits the discharge of surface or groundwaters, and in the permit, there is a numeric zero discharge allowance. So Npds permits have an effluent limit, and this one is 0 for both bacteria and nutrients. The nutrients are nitrogen and phosphorus. So they can't have any conduits that would discharge those materials directly either into surface water or into groundwater. And the way that the agencies propose to monitor the groundwater would be with the 11 existing groundwater monitoring wells that are there. They were installed under the Lost Valley permit. They are still there and operable and still being sampled quarterly by the Easter days. And those sample results to date are showing that all those wells are within their concentration limits that the agency set for them. There's also a current zero animal Npds permit that allows the operation and maintenance of the existing waste system that was constructed under the Lost Valley permit. And because that system remains, because of its definition, it requires a permit. And currently it's only being used to collect stormwater, any snow melt or precipitation that would fall on that production site. So both the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Environmental Quality developed the permit together. We operate with an MOU with DEQ, and DEQ is the Clean Water Act designated authority to develop NPDES permits. So both agencies work together to develop the permit and the related documents, and both, if we were able to issue the permit, it would be signed by both agencies. So the joint issuance, and this permit builds on information that we had already contained in the Lost Valley permit, and this permit will be one of the most protective CAFO permits developed to date. The permit will require a two-step approval of any proposed new waste system construction. So if we're able to issue a permit and the Easter days want to continue to build out that system as they proposed in that map, they would have to first present all the engineering required documents to us, get approval from us to begin the construction, complete the construction. We would inspect it prior to use and test it prior to use to make sure that it was functional according to the designs that they submitted to us. And then we would allow them to occupy it and operate it. So the two-step approval is a new thing in this permit that we have not used in previous permits. And then ODA regulates the permit requirements to be in compliance with a permit. And the way that we ensure that the permit requirements are being met and followed through is that we conduct several different types of inspections. And those include routine inspections. On a facility of this size and complexity, we would be looking at between 3 and 4 routine inspections per calendar year. As a comparison, our normal routine inspection frequency is 1 every 10 months for the majority of facilities that we permit. We would do them more frequently on a facility like this and others of this size and complexity. We also respond to complaints. If we do receive a complaint that's water quality related, we would respond to that. That's our top priority. We also would take enforcement actions commensurate to the issues that we found out there. And that may also include working with our partner agencies, depending on what we found going on at the facility at the time. And then there are pretty extensive monitoring and reporting requirements that the permittee has to provide a pretty constant flow of information back to us about how the facility is operating. So this is an example of types of monitoring that will be done. I talked a little bit about the lagoon lining requirement. They're double lined and they all have their own leak detection system. So below, in between the two liners, if the first liner were to get a hole in it, liquid would run and be captured by the second liner, and the leak detection system that's located between them would be triggered and would report to the dairy as they do their inspections that there's a leak, and then they would report that to us. We'd require them then to fix that leak and restore the system back to operability. There is an extensive soil testing requirement. Dairy has to collect annual samples on all the fields that receive manure processed wastewater, and they sample a 1 to 5 foot depth, and then they take 3 slices of that 5 foot core of soil and analyze each one of those slices, the top foot, the third foot, if you will, and the 5th foot of soil. are analyzed for a whole suite of nutrients so that we can monitor the nutrient applications they're doing and how the crops are removing them so there's not excessive buildup in the soil. There's also moisture monitoring for irrigation water leaching below the root zone. That's in every field, and it is a real-time monitoring setup. So there are sensors that are buried in the soil, and the first foot has like a sensor at 4 inches, 8 inches, and 12 inches, and then every foot below that down to 5 or 6 feet. Those sensors read to a computer that sends those readings real time into a central console, and then all those readings are recorded. So while crops are growing in the field and they're irrigating, either irrigating water or water mixed with wastewater, that monitoring system has to be functional. They also have the 11 groundwater monitoring wells to test for potential pollutants that would leave the root zone and enter groundwater. And those include bacteria and nitrates and a suite of other analytes, and those are monitored and sampled and analyzed on a quarterly basis. And then the permit does have that comprehensive record keeping and reporting requirements. If there's a violation, they have to report to us. In this permit, we did change those reporting requirements a bit. The Lost Valley permit, as an example, said they had to report violation within 24 hours. And we changed that to say they need to report a violation as soon as possible after becoming aware of a violation, but no later than 24 hours. So we're trying to move that, tighten up that condition. So the agencies are, there are multiple agencies, and we're doing a lot of coordination on this as part of lessons learned from the Lost Valley experience. And so a list of these agencies, and it's probably not exhaustive yet, but the current ones working on it are our agency, DEQ, the Water Resources Department, Oregon Health Authority, and local land use authorities. And this is a breakdown of what each agency is working on at this point. So ODA is working on permit development jointly with DEQ. ODA would do all the permit inspections and compliance activities if we were to issue a permit. And so that experience is guiding us as we develop the permit in these documents. Our food safety programs involved, because if they were to be permitted and wanted to milk cows, they'd have to have a milk license. They'd need a scale license, and they potentially would need other licenses from food safety depending on their process there. DEQ works with ODA on the CAFO permit document set development, provides oversight of our activities per our MOU with DEQ on the CAFO program, and also issues a septic system permit for that site. Water Resources Department has the authority on the water quantity side of the equation, and so the water rights for the multiple uses of water that would be could be happening on the site. So irrigating the crops, cleaning the dairy equipment, cleaning the milking equipment, and sanitizing that, drinking water for the employees and residents, cooling water if they used it for that activity. And so any water use requires a water right and oversight from the Water Resources Department. And these, excuse me, these agencies and groups are doing regular check-in meetings. We're on a once-a-week schedule to discuss where we're all at with the permit development and to prepare for robust public notice and participation process. So the outreach and communication plan, as I mentioned earlier, has a lot of the genesis in the work that we did with this group, as well as others during the Lost Valley permit development and issuance in 2017-2018 timeframe. And so based on lessons learned there, we are coordinating with our partner agencies to create a robust communication plan and have that available if you'd like to see it. It's quite lengthy, and Christina is the keeper of that document. And again, building on comments we received during the Lost Valley notice period and activities there. We've identified interested parties, EJ communities, non-governmental groups, and other stakeholders. And we've initiated outreach activities starting in July to tribes, the county commissions, Hermiston Hispanic Advisory Committee, the Environmental Justice Task Force, an environmental coalition to offer virtual presentations and meetings. And then we have extensive outreach that we plan to begin in early September using our updated communications plan. So once we're able to take this document to, this would be the permit and the permit evaluation report, to a public notice after we've done these outreach activities, we would then begin a 35-day public notice and participation process. And we would have a hearing. Any new facility of this magnitude requires a hearing. It would be virtual due to our COVID pandemic situation. And we're working with DEQ to set up the platform and the methodology for completing those hearings and receiving comment on the day that we have the hearing. Hearing will be held on the 30th day of the notice, and then it'll be open for 5 days after that for additional comments. So because of COVID-19, we've developed some enhancements in working with our partner agencies and information we've gotten from others, stakeholders, that we're going to offer virtual meetings and presentations. We have done some of those, and we have some pending. And if you're aware of anybody that would like to have one, or that we should be reaching out to deliver one of those, we'd love to hear about that. We'll have a virtual hearing, as I described. We're also planning to have real-time translation capabilities of that presentation. We plan on recording a bilingual webinar that would be available real-time if you wanted to tune into it, or on demand after it's presented. And then we would definitely be open for other ideas, either other groups that we should be reaching out to, or other methods to reach out to get this message and this information out to folks. And that's all I had this morning. I'd be happy to entertain questions if there are any.
So Wim, sorry to jump in, there are a couple of questions in the chat that members have been asking throughout your presentation, which is very good and detailed, by the way, so thank you for that. If you are comfortable taking a look at those questions and going through those, and also just saying them for our audience, just in case they can't see the chat conversation in here.
Okay. So before you go, Ben Duncan, I think my question is actually asked by, I think Jim was much more succinct. I think just talking about some of the lessons learned from the Lost Valley experience. You hit on this a little bit, but I think Jim asked a question I was really getting at. Instead of going back through the, relitigating the entire process, just talking about what you all have learned from that.
Sure. So if I'm looking at the chat list now, so I'll go to the Jim Kreider question. And the first one I see from him is, would like to discuss the notice and public hearing timeline. 35 days is too short. How long did it take to prepare this by the agencies, and how many staff? How is the community of individuals supposed to match these resources? I'm missing one. The first one I have from Jim is actually, what lessons were learned from Lost Valley, and will DEQ look at greenhouse gas emissions? So on that, I can respond to the lessons from the ODA side. I think there may be a DEQ individual that can possibly respond on the greenhouse gas emissions from the DEQ side, and if not, we can get back to you on that. So the Lost Valley activity, we put together the documents with the same group of agencies that we did, that we are currently working with, and went to public notice. We did not have a complete outreach plan, and heard about that from the Environmental Justice Task Force as well as others. We extended the public notice period and took that back to public notice. And so I think the public notice period in total was about 80 or 90 days with the extension. So that was one of the, how we responded to that. In our communication plan for this facility, you know, we've taken those things and tried to incorporate those into the plan that we're currently have developed and are currently implementing in order to not have those same things repeat themselves. The other thing is that regardless of the strength of the permit, which we felt was a very strong permit and, you know, very protective of the resource because it had to be, the relationship that the department has with the permittee is the one that operates the facility. The agencies don't do the operation. And so we conducted lots of inspections. We did find a lot of violations and worked, you know, both with ODA, DEQ, and EPA to take, you know, regulatory response in a pretty rapid manner to get the facility ultimately shut down because they could not come into compliance. And so again, you know, we've gone through that system to the point now where the permit is now 0 animals and only there to maintain the existing system. As I said, in this permit, one of the lessons would be that we were going to require anytime a new facility of some magnitude is constructed, that the facility construct it and then test run it first. And this would be analogous to, say, a home inspection. If you're going to do an addition on your house, you need a plumbing permit likely, and you need an electrical permit, and you'll get an inspection for each of those components. And they're going to say, yes, that's there and functional. We propose to do the same thing. So to say the waste system is there and functional, and then we would allow them to occupy the facility. The way the current permit language is written, they first must hold a permit before they can build anything. And so the agencies are also looking at that long-term to see if there needs to be a change there. So that's a few of the examples that I can give on that. I don't know if Matt or somebody from DEQ can respond on the greenhouse gas. Oh, Amira. No, that's for Matt. Matt, you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. And it looks like I can't turn my camera on, so I apologize for that. Just so folks are aware, I'm Matt Davis, Senior Policy and Legislative Analyst with DEQ. I spoke with you all yesterday. It's nice to be back. So I suspect folks on this task force are familiar with the history behind DEQ and the Environmental Quality Commission's authority to regulate emissions from
Hey,
sorry, folks, can you hear me now? I'm sorry, yeah. I got bumped off. Anyway, I'm guessing you all have discussed kind of the history behind the EQC's authority to regulate emissions from dairy operations in the past, and I don't want to go too deep into that other than to say that the Commission does have authority to implement recommendations from a task force that met over a decade ago that kind of recommended approaches to regulating air quality emissions. And at that time, their focus was really some of the emissions that have public health associated impacts, so ammonia, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter. Although most of the strategies that you would use to control those emissions have the co-benefit of reducing methane emissions, which is the greenhouse gas kind of most concern in this case. And so, over the years, DEQ and ODA have multiple times requested from the legislature funding to do that work. We've repeatedly been denied. I think the thing that the maybe the new piece of information is DEQ is evaluating under the context of Governor Brown's climate executive order, what opportunities may exist there to revisit this issue. And while agriculture isn't listed by name as a covered sector in the cap and reduce program that I talked about yesterday, we do think there are opportunities to design that program in a way that could see real reductions from dairy operations like the one that is proposed, that Easter Day Farms is proposing. So I don't have more details other than that. But I think we're happy to continue to keep the conversation going with the task force as we, again, explore what opportunities exist under this new executive order to revisit the issue.
So, hi, Amir, it's Wim back again. Are we okay on time? Do you want me to continue responding on questions? What's your pleasure there?
We're doing great on time.
Okay.
So can I hop in here, Chair?
Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. Wim, I don't know how much you're able to speak to this, but I do think it's important for the group to know that the Easter Day operator is a very different, a more well-established operator than the previous one that was there. Than the folks came in. Easter Day has been running a sizable operation across the river up in Washington for quite a while now, and is known as a pretty responsible operator up there who does the right things and is well organized. And I just think it's important for the group to understand as we're looking at this that this is not the same type of operator that we saw on this land before.
Well, sure, Scott, I can definitely comment on that. As Scott mentioned, the Easter days are a long-standing farming family and operate a potato packing business as well as several thousand acres of farming operations in parts of 3 states. They also have a beef feedlot that has an air quality permit in Washington state, and so we've had conversations with the regulatory authorities, both in air and water, both on their plant side as well as their feedlot side, because their processing plant also has a permit. And their compliance rate has been very good and longstanding with the Washington authorities in that regard. And so I would second that comment that, we definitely believe this is a very different operator than Mr. Tavelli was.
Wim, this is Valentin. I wanted to ask you about the 11 wells that is used to sample for testing. Are all of those wells just from one underground body of water, or is it separate? And how is it scattered throughout that area?
Well, sure. The monitoring well depth varies. So there are 11 separate wells. There are 7 that are on the perimeter of the facility on all 4 sides. And then there are 4 wells that are in that footprint, that 400-acre footprint that's right around where the lagoons and the milking center is, where the animals would be housed. And so that's how the wells are located. They are of various depth because there is some elevation change at that site. And we're trying to get those wells to sample water from the first aquifer, the first place we would define groundwater. So again, I'm not a hydrogeologist, but I believe they're all in the upper aquifer, the alluvial aquifer, and not into the basalt aquifer. I mean, I'm happy to provide a report about those well depths, and like I say, they vary from 30 feet, I think is our most shallow one, to well over 100 feet for the deepest one.
So I'm just wondering, how are we testing water that, our community out in Borum and Hermanston, the water that they consume, drink, it's not contaminated?
So so the assumption that these groundwater wells would monitor any discharge from the facility that would go into that groundwater, and then that groundwater would then move through whatever flow path it has to other places where people had wells into that same aquifer and would withdraw it. So currently our monitoring activity is limited to just what's the effect that that facility may have on that groundwater right there. And this permit doesn't require any monitoring that is off that site. It's all contained right on that site there.
And I guess one final question, and then I have just one comment or suggestion. So if a water test comes back with high levels of nitrate, what does that trigger? Does it trigger a more comprehensive test?
So that's a great question. So if one of the monitoring wells would show that there's a high level that exceeds the concentration limit that's set for that well, the agency, so that would be both ODA and DEQ, would have a conversation with the permittee to try to figure out, why is that level high? The first thing we do would be to run a retest as quick as we could, review the lab data and the methodology to make sure that, the quality assurance, quality control is good on both the sampling activity as well as the analytical activities. And after doing that, if it looked like that it was a real result that was violative, the agencies would then take action, and some of the options could be limiting nutrient applications in the vicinity of that well if we thought that was the cause of it, all the way up to prohibiting them if that well didn't improve. And so there is in the permit, the methodology about how to address those is contained in the permit and the DEQ rules, and our agencies would work together to implement that. I mean, ultimately, if that facility was discharging, it couldn't continue to operate if it couldn't remedy that activity.
Thanks for the response. And then I guess my final comment is regarding outreach and engagement. I don't know whether you have Evolcre as an organization to reach out and engage. That's Gustavo Morales' organization. And I'm also thinking that it will probably a good idea to engage the migrant parent groups of people at the local school districts.
Okay. Could you restate the Gustavo's agency, the name of his group?
Amir just threw it in the comments.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I see that.
And when there was about a few questions, I know Bob had here, but looks like Ben's got one as well.
Well, I want to actually build off. I think it's part of what Bob was asking, and it's part of what Valentin was just commenting on, and it's connected to the public comment received from Oregon Rural Action. And it related to kind of nitrates, existing nitrates in water supplies. And I think this is, it's partly a comment and maybe it's a question, but I think what Bob was getting to is something we've talked about for years. It's kind of the cumulative impact when we look permit by permit, and don't account for the ongoing and kind of persistent nature of some of these issues. So I guess, maybe it's a response to the comment, a public comment, just, do we have an explanation or understanding of existing nitrates in water that are impacting community? And do you see a relationship between kind of the issuance of this permit and the reality of what's already in the community?
So, there have been extensive work by the agencies, but most specifically, by DEQ, since they're the ones that manage the groundwater management area. And so the data that we look at jointly with them is data that they collect in their monitoring wells in the monitoring network for that area, to look at trends and what's going on in total in that area. Yeah, there's also, I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but there's also a petition by a group of non-governmental agencies or authorities, organizations that are asked EPA's drinking water program to take a look at the drinking water, the status of drinking water, because the nitrate contamination is a drinking water issue. And so that is ongoing, you know, on the EPA side, as well as the multiple agencies, OHA, DEQ, WRD, and ODA, to look at how EPA may respond to that and what is a more comprehensive way to look at. You know, one of the questions raised in that was, you know, is there any agency that has results of individual well tests, you know, from a wide range of private wells across that region? And so I think the answer is not clear there if there is that data available. And again, you know, not to be, you know, myopic on this permit, but the permit requirements are that we're looking at what this facility would produce, and the permit says that they cannot discharge anything. So if they're impacting, if they're adding anything at all, the agencies would have to take rapid response to that activity to get it to stop, because the agencies realize that we cannot allow any additional nitrate pollution to enter into that already impacted aquifer.
Okay, and there's one question I'd just like to follow up on that I asked, is that I get concerned with the public comment timeframes, because quite often it takes several agencies with 50, 60, 70 people to put together the proposal to go out to the public.
Mm-hmm.
But if you looked at the comment, it looks like public might only have 35 days in which to respond. And I'm always an advocate for giving the public more time, because we've got jobs, families, then we have to research the issues, and we don't have the resources. So I would like to ask that, if I'm misunderstanding the 35 days, that we look at a longer time frame for the public to digest the information, have their own meetings amongst themselves, the NGOs and the individuals, and then come back with a response.
Okay, well, thank you for that comment, and I'll definitely take that back to our agency group and see how we can respond to that by potentially lengthening that time period there. I see. Again, there are more questions. I'm happy to respond to those. I'll look to you for time. If I have time, I'll continue. If I don't, I will stop.
We got about 15-ish minutes.
Okay.
I have a question that will hopefully help you tie together Valentine Sanchez's concerns and our concerns about cumulative impacts and how you need to consider them. And one tie-in you could do is have citizen monitoring trigger a review of the permit. So if a community group has been monitoring it and gets an excessive level of nitrates, but they can't point a finger to any one entity, then that should trigger a review of the entities. That way you could have citizens reporting to agencies about where they live, work, and play, including the farmers and the farmer's family and the farmer's workers. So how does a citizen monitoring effort trigger review? Thank you.
Sure. Well, that's a really great question, and I definitely don't have a response to that, but a very intriguing proposition. I would say that even though these permitted facilities, and both permits that ODA issues as well as DEQ, because DEQ has wastewater application permits in the region as well, each one of those permits has a monitoring requirement. But as these facilities become contiguous or neighbors within the region, you can start looking at data from, so an upgradient well result from the Lost Valley site, the proposed Easter Day site, is probably a downgradient a result for a neighboring farming activity. And some of those we do permit. And so the agencies do look at that data in a cumulative way. There are two dairies that are adjacent to Lost Valley, one directly north across the road and one to the northeast, that also have monitoring wells and data and soil data and moisture data. And so the agencies aggregate that to look at, is there a regional issue versus an individual issue? And so I think we are doing some look at that, but we're definitely not looking as comprehensively as a citizen monitoring network may provide data that could be illuminating there.
Yeah.
We've got about 15 minutes. Let's also hear from Rose about pesticides. So I think I'm gonna let Rose go next to talk a little bit about pesticides. But I just want to quickly finish by I encourage you all to think about when you are doing public comment. I know that in the past they've been done in person. Obviously now with COVID, that's not really a possibility. I'm unsure of how you all are going to be doing that, if it's going to be via Zoom or a webinar. But I would encourage you all to also perhaps think about doing things on Facebook Live, just because a lot of the community that is out in that area, I think it's almost 40% are either Latinx or immigrants, might have an easier time with something like a Facebook Live, in partnership with a community organization like Uvalcree, or United Farm Worker Union, or Raices, the Hispanic Advisory Commission. There's one person in particular I would encourage you all to talk to. His name is Roy Barone. His last name Barron. He's both a city councilor as well as a member of the Hispanic Advisory Commission, and is also a founder of some local community groups in the area. So I would highly encourage you all to speak with him and try to partner up to figure out the best way you can get community input, community feedback about this operation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Joel. We have reached out to Hispanic Advisory Committee chair, and he indicated that he's happy to share with the Hispanic community through his networks, and so we will be working with him specifically for that outreach. And I appreciate all those other ideas.
Yeah, like I said, the chair is great, but I would really try to connect with Roy, just because he has, I think, a good finger on the pulse in terms of a lot of the local groups and organizing efforts. But with that, I'll turn it over to Rose to talk about some pesticides.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Of course.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so this is my first screen sharing type thing with Zoom, so bear with me. So I'm going to be talking about ODA's proposed Chlorpyrifos rule. I'm going to go over here. No, you can't do that. And I'm going to change the slide. Do you see the next slide changed?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So a little bit as far as the, first I want to kind of step back about myself. I used to actually sit on where Christina Higbee is sitting. And so it was really a pleasure always to attend these meetings. And so it's kind of an honor to be able to do a presentation. So I was really actually thrilled to get an invitation. So kind of back to Chlorpyrifos, it's really primarily an agricultural insecticide at this point, but not exclusively. It's been used since 1965, so it's one of those old organophosphate insecticides that we still have with us. It's used on just a tremendously wide variety of crops, unlike some other pesticides, which have more of a narrow focus. It's really effective as both a foliar and soil insecticide, and there aren't that many pesticides that have soil activity. And so it's been effective for, let's say you're a radish grower and you have maggots in the soil that are attacking the radish. It will control those, and it's also inexpensive. And so we've kind of got that combination going on. But the kind of the downside of that is for decades, we have been hearing about health concerns being expressed. And EPA has changed the label over the years. It used to be something that was used inside people's homes, and it's no longer allowed for use inside residential homes, except there is a bait, a cockroach bait that contains chlorpyrifos. There are also uses for vector control. That would be controlling mosquitoes, and some other uses, golf courses, for example. Those aren't really residential because you can't really apply it on somebody's lawn, but they're urban, the golf course one. You're probably familiar with hearing about chlorpyrifos because there have been multiple bills over the years introduced into the Oregon legislature about chlorpyrifos, either banning it or severely restricting use. However, none of these have completed that process. And so we don't have any bills that were enacted. That combined with our Oregon Attorney General joining a lawsuit in 2019, and that lawsuit was against the US EPA for allowing the use of chlorpyrifos. And according to our Attorney General, this is a pesticide that can harm infant and child neurological development. That combination really spurred our agency to develop a work group. If you're interested a little bit on the federal level and some of the things that have been going on the federal level, there's a long history of changes and also a long history of different types of risk assessments that EPA has done. I think one of the confounding things is that whenever they do a risk assessment, a lot of times there are some different outcomes. And so that makes it kind of hard to know what to do with that information. There are also numerous and ongoing lawsuits, and some of that information is on their website. So you might want to just kind of take a look at that if you're interested in some of the regulatory history associated with this active ingredient. So in December 2019, ODA launched a work group, and the purpose really was to help us evaluate some of the current uses that are going on in Oregon and whether we should have future restrictions and what some of these future restrictions would look like. We had 3 meetings starting in December and they ended in May. We really focused on pesticide exposure pathways, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Some of the existing requirements that are on the pesticide labels that are there intended to protect workers, the public, and the environment from exposure, and really looking at those and assessing whether those are really adequate for our needs here in Oregon. And then also discussing some of the assessments of chlorpyrifos over the years. The Oregon Health Authority was particularly helpful in this area, and I would urge you to go to the Oregon Department of Agriculture's website for rulemaking, and there you'll see a couple of presentations. Well, one presentation in particular from OHA called Health Effects of Acute and Chronic Chlorpyrifos Exposure. And then there were so many questions for OHA that they actually came back with something in writing, just kind of clarifying and elaborating on what they presented. And so we thought that was an important piece. It was important that they were part of the work group, and I'll talk about who some of those work group members are. After we had the first 2 meetings, we came back to the work group with just some concepts of what a possible draft rule might look like, and they gave us some additional feedback. So based on that feedback and the information that we had from the risk assessments and our partners at OHA, we developed a draft rule, and we're going to be talking again with this work group on August 31st. As far as the work group members, we tried to be as inclusive as possible, having members of the environmental community, having members that are representing workers such as Paccoon. We, of course, had OHA, Oregon State University, OHSU, farmers, and then Scott Dahlman, who is also on this call, and he was representing Oregonians for Food and Shelter. We had Farm Bureau, hazelnut growers, individual representing many various commissions, golf course superintendent, somebody representing that organization, and then very importantly, the Oregon Association of Nurseries. So why are we proposing to limit the use of chlorpyrifos? Well, our agency is really tasked with regulating the safe applications of pesticides in Oregon. And so we want to ensure that that happens. We believe that the regulatory changes that we're proposing will reduce risks to workers and increase safety to our applicators, our farm workers, our bystanders. And the reason it's important for bystanders is when we look at a lot of our complaints, it's from bystanders. It's from somebody who's living next door to a pesticide application and believe that they're smelling things or that they are somehow exposed and possibly their health is being impacted. Consumers would be buying treated fruits and vegetables and grains and other products, and then certainly the environment. I think when I first started, well, at one point getting started with chlorpyrifos back in the Kitsapper era, you know, it was all about salmon and water quality, and we still are focusing on that also. But that's certainly still a concern for us, is that the environment is not negatively impacted, and our water is safe to drink. And this is kind of some of the things that we're proposing is kind of geared in that direction. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So our primary health concerns are really this neurodevelopmental issue with developing children, fetuses, and then also young children. There also is some recent data about chronic occupational exposure. OHSU released a paper in March of 2020 talking about possible behavioral changes which can occur with chronic occupational exposure. And so that is somebody who's making applications, or in some cases, somebody who's working routinely among chlorpyrifos. And once again, I think one of the things that's been difficult is that we've had a lot of different studies out there, and I think it's, you know, depending on how the study is constructed, how the data is reviewed, we can have different types of results from these. But we wanted to err on the side of caution. So our focus was not to really debate the science a lot, because there are some of the best minds in the country that are looking at these very intense scientific studies on developmental delays and all sorts of things. And so we did not want to spend a lot of time. We did spend some time on that, but what we wanted to do is focus on just reducing exposure. Like, how can we reduce that? You know, if we think of the kind of that risk equation where you have risk and that equals toxicity times exposure, let's just kind of focus on that exposure in order to reduce risk. So we looked at occupational exposure, and that would be for applicators and other pesticide handlers, so the mixer and loaders, and also workers that might be coming into contact with pesticide residues on treated crops. We looked at bystander exposure, and that could include maybe children in a schoolyard, for example. We looked at drift and then the post-application volatilization. I think it's not that well known that there is a kind of a semi-volatile component to chlorpyrifos. And I think that's why the state of California was picking it up in its air monitoring samples. It's also been picked up in some air monitoring samples here in Oregon. We also wanted to look at drinking water and aquatic life as part of the equation. So really trying to be comprehensive about it. And I am hoping that we were successful with what we've done. So how does this proposed rule reduce exposure? For the first thing it does is it classifies all chlorpyrifos products as restricted use. And we're doing an exception of cattle ear tags. And at some point, if you want to ask me about that, we can talk about that. We're also requiring that all applications be conducted by people who are certified and licensed. This is a change, and so there is for most restricted use pesticides, you can have somebody who is a certified applicator, somebody who has studied certain types of material, take an exam, they pass that exam, they attend these what we call recertification classes, kind of like continuing education classes. And those individuals we call certified. They are able to supervise somebody who is not certified, but they do need to provide instruction and everything. But when we stepped back and we thought about chlorpyrifos, we said, you know, let's just make it where the person making the application, everybody needs to be certified. So there's no longer telling your worker to go make that application, because we did hear a lot from the farm advocacy community that individuals who are working at farms were told to go make applications and that they did not have adequate information to know how to protect themselves if there should be an incident, or they didn't have proper instructions. You know, that is not, if that is true, if that is really going on, that actually is against the law. There's a federal law that if you are to be applying pesticides, that you need to be provided this information. But just kind of to err on caution, we said everybody needs to be licensed, not only to buy that material, but to purchase or to apply it. Also, starting in 2020 this year, we're going to be prohibiting the use on golf courses. There's the potential there for human exposure and tracking in residues. Also, mosquito control. A lot of those are what we call ultra low volume. And so those are very small particles that can drift and float in the air a bit. And so that was not seen as a really a necessary use for chlorpyrifos. And then we looked at greenhouse use, where there are a lot of workers. And so most of those greenhouse uses will be prohibited. There are some greenhouses where they can just roll back the whole top of the greenhouse. In certain ones like that, we are proposing that that's an allowable use, but the vast majority of greenhouses, chlorpyrifos will not be able to be used. We also looked at Christmas trees, and the reason we looked at Christmas trees is because we received more complaints about applications close to Christmas trees than any other crop. And so what we are proposing is to limit the use between April and June 15th. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that there is a certain pest that is very difficult to control, and Chlorpyrifos controls it during that time period. But the reason we're cutting it off at that time period is that the tree shearers will be coming in, and that there is a lot of contact with the foliage at that time period. And then, of course, we have harvesting that takes place. So we think all the way along the line that this will protect workers. And then I think that consumers, there was a concern about consumers that during one of the hearings, somebody said, you know, what do you mean you're spraying that tree and then I'm bringing it into my home? And so I think that this really, having that application, you know, in June, and those trees not being harvested for months, I think will really help with any of those kinds of concerns or any kind of potential exposure. So that is kind of like the maximum thing for safety at this point. So these are, and when you're looking at these, I want you to think of some of these being interim. Also, currently farm workers only have to wait 24 hours before they can enter a treated field not wearing personal protective equipment. We're proposing to go from 24 hours to 4 days. We're getting a lot of feedback from the farm industry that that's not practical, that we've proposed it to be that long, but then we hear from the other direction that it's not long enough. But that's what you get when you get comments, a lot of diversity, which we appreciate actually. We've also looked at the respirator requirement for applicators. And because there are so many lawsuits associated with this particular product, the label was never modernized. It was basically just stayed stationary. And so it has some rather old language on it. And so we're modernizing that and making it more protective for the applicator. We also implemented large buffers between the treatment site and sensitive areas. And I'll talk a little bit about the sensitive areas and also permanent waterways. So I want to give you an example of what we've done for sensitive areas. So on the pesticide label for ground boom and chemigation and air blast, the label gave 10 feet. Between a sensitive site, which could be a residence, school, what have you. So what we've done is we've changed that, and I'll mention aerial would be 10 to 80 feet. So with, for example, aerial, instead of 10 to 80 feet, we've proposed 300. And for air blast, instead of 10 feet, we're proposing 300 feet. There's a specialized type of directed air blast. We're proposing, instead of 10 feet, we're proposing 150 feet. And for ground boom and chemigation, we're proposing, instead of 10 feet, we're proposing 60 feet. And as far as trying to reduce that exposure. For the aquatic, we're also going from like aerial, that's on the pesticide label, 150 feet, we're proposing 300 feet. And for air blast, kind of traditional air blast, we're going from 50 feet on the label to 300 feet. Direct air blast, 50 feet to 150 feet. And then the ground boom, 25 feet to 60 feet. And so in all those cases, we're very much increasing the buffer. And we have been hearing that people are finding those buffers, some people are finding them too large. And then as of December 31st, 2023, we are prohibiting the use or sale of Chlorpyrifos with a few exceptions, and I'm going to talk about those exceptions. before I talk about those exceptions, I'm going to talk about sensitive sites. And these are areas that are frequented by non-occupational bystanders, particularly children. And so when we put those large buffers or propose those large buffers, we're talking about between the treated site and homes, residential buildings, farm worker housing, schools, nursing homes, hospitals, etc., and then all the property. So if you had a school, it wouldn't just be the school building, it would be also the property associated with that school. So that would incorporate that school playground. For example, we aren't including though really the agricultural buildings. That wouldn't be very practical at all, like a barn, or you have a shed, or some place that they're fixing their equipment. And then we're also not including roads. And the reason that we didn't include roads is because that's actually covered under something called the application exclusion zone. And so we believe that that will be, that for this product, this would be 150 feet. So as far as kind of stepping back, as far as what crops, I mentioned wide variety of crops, Christmas trees, cole crops, those are your like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and many of our crops grown for seed. And a lot of these, it's for something called symphyllans, and which is not even an insect. It looks more like a centipede, and we have a lot of those in the valley, and they're very destructive. It's used on alfalfa, beans, sweet corn, sugar beets, and on nursery crops. A lot of times on the nursery crops for root weevils. And they're trying to control usually the adult stage, but not only. You might have heard of this product before, and it was referred to as Lorsban or Dursban, or we have a couple other names, Warhawk, and a couple of those. So I mentioned that as December 31st, 2023, that it will be prohibited to use or sell Chlorpyrifos in the exceptions. The exceptions are actually remarkably similar to what California has. Everybody thinks that California, that they just banned it, but actually they're still allowing granular uses in seed treatments. And that's also what we're proposing. There are a couple of reasons for that. The granular uses are mostly below ground. They're being used at planting or usually immediately after planting. And so you're not having the same level of potential exposure. Another reason is there are very few pesticides that are very effective on soil pests. And so not having that potential, that high potential of farm worker exposure, where let's say you're spraying a plant and then you have a farm worker walk past it. If you've got a granular material and it's below ground, it's actually probably, I hate to use the word safe, but probably I'll use the word lower risk. It's the most lowest risk type of application method. Also, the seed treatments, when we're looking at seed treatments with insecticides, we're mostly, not exclusively, but we're mostly looking at Chlorpyrifos and neonicotinoids. I know that some people have had concerns in some states of what they call dusting off, and this is where with some of these really large pieces of equipment in some of these states where they have vast acreages of a particular type of crop, they have really big equipment, and it's really injecting those seeds at a pretty rapid rate and kind of almost an aggressive manner. And so they end up sometimes getting what they call dust off. And so some of that dust can travel to other areas like beehives or even close to people. So, but we have not seen that issue here in Oregon. And so that's another reason we're allowing that. We did put a provision in here as far as if there was some pest emergency. And this is something that we're still kind of working on. What would that look like? What is the mechanism of that? The one thing that we can ensure people of is that will be a thoroughly transparent process if we grant or declare a pest emergency, and the only pesticide that really would be good for the job or necessary because it's an emergency would be Chlorpyrifos. That would be a very transparent process. And we'd pull that Chlorpyrifos work group together and involve others. And then we have cattle ear tags. That's something that, is in basically a piece of plastic and is put on a cattle, cattle in the range because they get biting flies that go to their eyes. It's something that's used in a rotation and it's not used very often. It's not the type of thing that you're going to get bystander exposure from. And so we believe that that was something, because it's so infrequently used, the risk to workers, bystanders, residues in our food crops, contamination of water, that was also a low risk, that we actually just left it out of our rulemaking. I mentioned... Yeah.
How much time do we have left? We're running a little short on time.
So. Oh, you are. Okay. Oh, you are. Okay. Here, I'm going to go really quickly. If you want to go to our website, you can see our rule, and we've translated that into Spanish, and also the notice and justification of adopting this particular rule. And if you want to comment, the current comment period ends October 1st. And we opened August 3rd.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rose. I think we're going to take probably 5 minutes for some quick questions, and then if we have other questions we can't get to, we'll send them to Rose, and
yeah,
it'd be great to get some stuff back. So I'll open it up to task force members to ask some quick questions. And I'll just say myself too that I've been following this issue pretty closely, and along with more of the advocates at BT and PCUN. So I definitely think we as a task force should comment on this rule as well, because I know the EPA was already going to phase it out back in 2016, and then we're in a situation because of the rollback. But I see a bunch of questions on the chat. Maybe if folks can just quickly unmute themselves, it might be faster for you to just say your question out loud.
Yeah, I'm having trouble even seeing the chat box right now. But yeah, oh wait, here.
Maybe I could just open up, because I think my question's fairly quick. I know out here in Eastern Oregon, a lot of times when they spray, an individual can put a do not spray sign in front of their property, which will prevent that area from being sprayed. Will that option be available in this particular process?
Well, if a farmer is making an application and it goes onto your property, that's actually currently a violation. You should not need to do that. So if you believe that drift has occurred onto your property, I would urge you to call the Oregon Department of Agriculture. We have a whole team of pesticide investigators, and they go out and they do sampling, they conduct interviews to determine whether drift has occurred. So if somebody's getting Chlorpyrifos or any other pesticide on their property, and that wasn't the treatment site, that's a violation of federal and state law.
Okay, thank you. I just saw public and private roads, so just wanted to clarify. But thank you, Rose, for a great presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, hello, this is Valentin. Can you guys hear me? Just one quick question. I know we didn't have much time, but I wanted to ask you about the enforcement aspect of it, and also if you can touch briefly on the civil penalty.
Yeah, so this has not increased the enforcement. We are already, depending on how egregious the activity is, we can already go up to $10,000 penalty. And so this would be enforced similar to all of our other rules. And so we would go through it as a restricted use. All of it will be a restricted use pesticide. So that already kind of bumps it up in the enforcement matrix. But we actually have the entire enforcement matrix on our website under enforcement. But we haven't built in anything extra with this particular rule.
And is there any additional protection, for whistleblower or retaliation if an employee wants to make a complaint about his employer using Chlorpyrifos, that it's against the new regulations?
Yeah, the retaliation for behavior is actually under WPS. And so if somebody is illegally applying pesticides, it's under the worker protection standard. And what we would do in that case is we would work with Oregon OSHA, and we would also work with the US EPA. And we have a cooperative agreement to implement part of the worker protection standard, and then Oregon OSHA does. So it would be 3 agencies would be involved with that particular thing. That would not be acceptable.
And I guess one final question I have is, if an employer is asking one of his employees to apply the pesticide Chlorpyrifos in an unsafe manner, would that employee also be given a civil penalty, or is it just the employer?
Yeah, we really look at who is responsible for that application. And it really is a supervising applicator. This does happen where you have a farmer who tells an employee to do something because maybe that employee wasn't properly trained, or something happens. If they're told, certainly if they're told to do something illegal, it's that employer that is responsible. There's definitely a recognition that the employees, they want to keep their job. They don't want to be subordinate. And sometimes the employee doesn't even know what portion of that is legal or not until even after the fact. And then it's like, what do they do? And so, we would appreciate receiving any of those calls. I know that some people might feel more comfortable working with PCOON and or Oregon Law Center or another advocacy group than to reach out to us directly. But we do want to hear from people if there's that kind of thing going on.
Yeah, thanks.
I just had a quick question for you, Rose, and I think may take 1 or 2 and then try to make sure we move on. But in terms of that work group that you showed us earlier, what was the recruitment process for that like? I'm just curious about, I guess, who was involved in sending out invites.
Yeah, well, usually what will happen is we'll try to think who might this impact the most and make sure that we have a representative group. And so we definitely wanted to have, certainly there are a lot of farm groups, there are a lot of environmental groups. And so in a way, I think a lot of times as agencies, we do contact the people that we work with a lot and feel represents a lot of the different groups, and hope that they are connecting with others, not only their own constituents, but with other advocacy groups. We did make it open for others to attend. And so, for example, the Oregon Law Center, who represents a lot of farm workers. Even though officially they weren't on the work group, they attended all of the work group meetings, and we made it open to anybody if they wanted to attend. And we wanted to be really transparent also as far as what were we doing, what were those presentations, and to post that all up. But we wanted to have it kind of a manageable work group also, and so you don't want them to get too big.
Sure.
But
my concern isn't necessarily the size of the work group. I think the size was great. I was just looking at the list, and it seemed like you mentioned, there were some folks that were missing off of that official groups, but it sounds like they were still there regardless. So I guess I'm just curious, how are you were weighing, who to make official members of the work group and who not?
Yeah, there's always, I think, maybe a little bit of an art for an agency, but our goal is really to get somebody who is representing a broad number of people, somebody who's really engaged, and somebody who has a lot of connections to other people, so that we would hope that after our conversations that they would let their members know where the meeting notes are, where those presentations are. So I think a lot of it was that, like, who is like the most connected also with other groups too, not only their own members. So we're hoping that we succeeded with that.
Great. Well, thank you, Rose. I appreciate it. Amira's going to be taking the questions from task force members and forwarding them to you probably after the meeting, and it'd be great to get something back. And then for task force members, if you have other questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then Amira will compile them and send them to Rose.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate being asked.
Of course. Thank you. We've been sitting for like an hour and a half, so I'm going to propose we take a quick 5-minute stretch break, and then we'll reconvene and try and pick up public comment. So 10:41-ish, 42-ish. I'll see y'all soon.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you.
Hey folks, welcome back. So we're a little behind, but we'll catch up here in a minute. At this point, we have public comment. If you could please raise your hand, that way we can unmute you and we can hear from you for public comment. Just a reminder, if you could try to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less, that would be great. And please make sure you introduce yourselves to the task force. So looks like we've got 2 hands raised for today. And I'll start off with the first one I saw. Start off with Kristen.
Good morning. Good morning, members of the Environmental Justice Task Force. Thank you for this opportunity this morning to raise some long-term environmental justice concerns as we are considering as a state locating another large dairy in Eastern Oregon. My name is Kristen Ostrom, and I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Rural Action, a grassroots community organization working in Eastern Oregon to promote social, environmental, racial, and economic justice to strengthen rural communities. We've submitted a letter for public comment written by the chair of our organization, Mitch Wolgamott, and I just wanted to highlight a few items in this letter, and then specifically ask for the continued help of the Environmental Justice Task Force and guidance as we're moving forward. As our board chair, Mitch Wolgamott, writes, given your important role to advise the governor and state agencies on issues of environmental justice, we are writing to raise a concern about the ongoing and long-term cumulative impact of industrial agriculture and large dairies on our water, air, and the long-term health of our rural people and communities in Morrow and Umatilla counties. We are, as an organization and leadership team, members of the community. We are Latino and Anglo. We are professionals and farm workers, business owners, social service professionals, long-term residents, and recent immigrants. The board chair writes, I am also a former manager and administrator of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. We experience, and I have seen firsthand, writes the board chair, how the agricultural industrial complex has disproportionately affected our minority, low-income, and tribal communities in rural Eastern Oregon. In particular is the lower Umatilla groundwater management area, the area between Morrow and Umatilla counties. For 3 decades, our area has been known to regulators to have elevated nitrate levels due to massive water and fertilizer applications on our dry and porous land soils in the area. The area has high nitrate levels that contaminate our drinking water. Levels above 10 parts per million can cause people to get sick, especially babies, older people, and people with immune disorders. We know that high levels of nitrates can cause serious health problems, including birth defects, cancers, and other diseases. Over time, many rural water associations and cities have spent millions of dollars to either treat or move water sources to deal with this problem, but many in our communities do not have access to those water sources and continue to drink contaminated water. The industrial irrigators and large dairies that contribute the majority of the nitrate contaminants continue to pollute. On top of all of this, we've been hit hard by COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic is sort of piling on injustices in our rural communities. We don't come today with answers, but we come with lots of questions. And we're coming to, in particular, to ask your help, ask for the continued help of the Environmental Justice Task Force. And in particular, we're asking you to help continue to ask the environmental justice questions. Thank you so much to each of the task force members, Joel and Ben, Bob and Jim and Valentine, for asking the important questions you asked earlier in the session. In particular, looking at the cumulative impact, looking at the public comment period, the length of time, and how we reach out to the community and have time and make sure it's accessible for people to participate, and looking at the citizen review options. Thank you so much for asking those environmental justice questions, and thank you for your willingness to continue to ask those questions. And we ask that you help us understand the full impact of adding an additional large dairy to our environmentally vulnerable area in Eastern Oregon. And most particularly, we ask you to help ensure that the people who are disproportionately affected can be a part of the decision-making process. Thank you so much for your task force, for your ongoing work, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kristen. We have Marianne Cooper next.
Good morning. Are you able to hear me well?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Marianne Cooper. I am the Vice President of Public Policy for the Oregon Farm Bureau Federation. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. We also sent in a letter yesterday, and I know there's a couple other folks on to comment, so I will try not to cover ground we've already covered, but just wanted to speak a little to the state's CAFO program. So Oregon Farm Bureau, we represent about 6,000 family farmers across the state, several of whom hold CAFO permits. CAFO permits, it's important to note, are just a water quality permit. So whether that permit's required doesn't have anything to do with the size of the operation, the type of the operation, but really how they propose to manage manure and whether they plan to use that product as fertilizer on the farm. So in Oregon, we have CAFOs that are as small as a few animals all the way up to several thousand. We also have CAFOs for things like dog kennels, alpaca farms, dairies, beef cows, sheep, and our organization represents folks that have CAFOs across all of those program areas. One of the things that I would like to note about our CAFO program is we consistently document high rates of compliance during routine inspections, and there's an excellent track record within the program of proactively addressing any water quality issues that are found during the inspections. So that compliance right now is approximately 98%. And for us, looking at the experience at the now defunct Lost Valley Farm, that goes to demonstrate that even when there is a persistent non-compliance issue due to poor management, the agencies are able to act quickly to make sure there's no harms to the state's water resources. So we absolutely do not deny that that farm was not well managed and was not complying with their permit. But the good thing, as we all heard, is that there wasn't harm to the state's water resources because we have the agencies able to step up and address issues and go through the enforcement process before a problem hits groundwater or surface water. So we view that as a success story in an unfortunate situation. We also support the collaborative role that DEQ and ODA play with the program. ODA has a really unique expertise within the program that we want to make sure is preserved. Across all program areas, DEQ staff relies on ODA to do nutrient management. And so ODA is the one that's really versed in when there's agronomic application, what those rates look like, and basically making sure that the byproduct is being applied in a way that is having a fertilizing effect and isn't going beyond that and causing problems with groundwater. And there's somebody else on that's much more familiar with the lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area than I am, so I won't talk extensively about that except to say that those issues are not CAFO related. And that, these CAFO permits that are coming in and existing CAFO permits in the area are very tightly regulated to ensure that they're not exacerbating any existing issues in those basins. But there's folks that can talk a lot more about what the agricultural community is doing proactively in the basin to help address those concerns and make sure that the groundwater is improving. The last thing I would note in closing is we think it's really important to note that size is not an indication of stewardship. And in fact, a lot of the larger operations are, they have more resources to invest in. And I think of the Mount Canyon Farms with they have a work with Nature Conservancy to protect land. So they're often able to kind of go above and beyond with environmental stewardship or kind of extra add-ons to make sure the animals are more comfortable. And have kind of top-notch animal welfare. And they also have much more contact with regulatory bodies. So they're much more proactive and receive increased scrutiny from regulators in the local community. And in closing, CAFOs across the state are the backbone of a lot of their rural communities. These are oftentimes family scale operations that are employing other families in the community, employing people in their community. And in a lot of rural areas, we know it's really hard to find jobs. And so it's really important that we keep these massive job providers, that keep them in business and able to provide jobs to the community, to be those good stewards, to have their dedication to animal welfare. Because we are concerned about what we would see if, for example, we did not allow new operations to come in or we did not allow operations to grow as they are able to. you would see a decrease in jobs in those communities and less opportunity for people. And again, we have really great examples of CAFOs of operations in the state that have been very proactive in elevating folks within their community, giving them additional opportunities, educational opportunities, and moving them up through kind of the management structure of the farm, make sure that they are able to continue to be that backbone of their community and be providing the jobs, the resources, and the dedication that is needed to help be that economic base of the community. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thanks so much, Mary. We've got next Tammy.
Good morning. This is Tammy Kerr with the Oregon Dairy Farmers Association. Can you hear me okay?
You're a little far away. You might want to try getting close to your mic.
Is this a little bit better?
That's better.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Tammy Kerr. I'm the Executive Director for the Oregon Dairy Farmers Association, and we represent all dairy farms in the state of Oregon, from the smallest farm to the largest, both conventional and organic, and all grade A dairy licensed farms. All of these farms are required to have a CAFO permit. The Oregon Department of Agriculture has been very effective in managing and regulating the CAFO program for more than 25 years, and they have a 98% compliance rate to show for their efforts. It's been a very robust system with routine inspections and more frequently for those larger farms. ODA staff and inspectors have the technical expertise to educate farmers and solve problems while protecting the waters of our state. And Oregon is the only state in the US that requires both a CAFO permit and an animal waste management permit for all grade A dairy farms. When it comes to human health and the safety of our food supply, we all want the same things: clean air, clean water, and healthy communities. Oregon dairy farmers are doing their part, not only when it comes to producing high quality milk, but also when it comes to operating within a high degree of responsibility and respect for human, animal, and community health. Dairy farmers operate this way because our families and our employees both live in the same communities where we farm. We drink the same water and breathe the same air. In taking care of our dairy farms, we're also taking care of our communities. And the Oregon dairy industry is very diverse. We have farms of all sizes, both conventional and organic, and different management models, but all are held to the same high regulatory standards for animal care, environmental impact, and food safety. Whether a farm is successful or responsible is not measured by the number of acres or the size of its herd, but on the hard work that it takes to turn good values into good outcomes 365 days a year. 3 Mile Canyon Farms is often mentioned when we discuss CAFOs because they are the largest dairy farm in our state. But I believe that they are also the poster child for how to do it right. They were the first dairy farm in the United States to receive a perfect 100% score on a third-party animal welfare audit. They have a very long-standing college internship program. They have an extremely diverse workforce and have a history of promoting from within. And there's a lot of local jobs that have been created in Morrow County because of 3 Mile Canyon Farms. They have built a zero waste operation, meaning that everything generated from their animals and crops on the farm is reused or recycled. And a big part of their operation is a methane digester that uses waste materials from their cows and converts it into carbon negative renewable natural gas. The digester sequests greenhouse gas emissions equal to about what 29,000 passenger vehicles generate each year. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the CAFO program and how Oregon dairy farmers across the state are doing their part to protect the waters of our state while they care for their animals, their land, and their communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. It looks like I have also here J.R. Cook.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Am I getting notes that my internet's unstable?
No, you sound good on our end.
Okay, great. Thanks. And thanks to the Environmental Justice Commission for taking up these issues and providing an opportunity for us to discuss areas of importance to our economy and way of life in Eastern Oregon. My name is J.R. Cook. I'm the director of the Northeast Oregon Water Association. We're kind of a unique organization. We formed in 2013 with an emphasis on protecting, sustaining, and enhancing our value-added agricultural land base and the businesses that rely upon it in Northeast Oregon. Our membership is basically 300,000 acres of irrigated farmland in North Morrow and West Umatilla County, as well as the cities, ports, districts, special districts, and individual groups like realtors, et cetera, that rely upon that economy for our growth and sustainability. And we started out trying to fix a longstanding issue. I've been working and residing in the basin my whole life, but for the last 19 years focused primarily on fixing groundwater issues related to quantity in our deep basalt aquifers. And we've made great strides, over $100 million of investment have been invested into our region in the last 3 years. Of that, 11 million is state funding. The remainder is local debt service and equity contributions. And by next year, we'll be the first region in the state of Oregon to actually have a groundwater savings program established and tested to use these mitigated water supplies to fix longstanding water issues in our basin. We're transitioning to work on the groundwater quality work. We know that that's a big issue in the ordinance alluvial aquifer and what everybody believes to be a hydraulically connected 352,000 acre groundwater management area. We'll tell you the data defends and has defended for years that is a misnomer. That is not a 352,000 acre aquifer. There's various compartments within that aquifer that have various issues and contributors established within them. And another misnomer is the bulk of our drinking water does not come from that aquifer. The bulk of our drinking water either comes from treated Columbia River water, which is the case for the city of Boardman, or cased and sealed deep basalt aquifers into the aquifers we're trying to recover with these new large projects. And in that order, we've got an MOA with the Oregon Environmental Council to do the same thing with water quality that we did with water quantity, which is to better define the data, the compartments of the alluvial aquifer that are connected and disconnected from one another, and figure out action plans and areas of problems and contribution that we can address through fixing loading issues, dealing with minimizing legacy contaminants through the use of aquifer recharge and dilution, and ultimately education and some of our rural residential and small hobby farm type sized agricultural operations that might not know the same impacts of overloading that some of our commercial operations do. The reason I say that today is that I know that a lot of the concern around this dairy is tied to the further impacts to the lower Umatilla Basin groundwater management area. I can tell the group with data to defend that from our work that dairies and land application of wastewater in our area is the highest target because that's the highest volume, but it is the most regulated industry in our area. And what we've seen is that there is minimal contribution compared to legacy issues and some of the loading issues in other aquifers. So what we would like to do is continue to encourage the Environmental Justice Commission and those interested in this to work with OEC, our organization, and others to truly fix the problem. I do encourage folks to get to know the Easterday family. We're very proud to have them on this side of the river because they're working with us to help fix the problem and minimize further impacts. And with that, I will sign off and thank the Environmental Justice again for allowing us to speak today.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has public comment for today? Please raise your hand or unmute yourselves. Going once, going twice. Okay, perfect. So next, we'll move on to some EJTF business. We got a number of things, I think, in here, from meeting checklists to outreach to agency and advocates, to structure on your reports, or work plan, engage with advocacy commissions, so on and so forth. But I guess real quick before we really get into that, just wanted to see if task force members had any other EJTF business they wanted to add to this long list that I don't think we're going to get to all of.
Hello?
Yeah.
So a couple things. I have unstable internet, as my computer keeps telling me. I didn't know if we want to formally, I put this in a comment, but then I got kicked off. If we want to make either a motion or formalize in the minutes the ask that Jim made from Oregon Department of Agriculture to extend the public engagement process from the 35 days. So if we didn't do that, which I imagine we didn't, I would love to propose a motion that we make a formal ask to ODA through WIM and Christina to move that ask forward.
Sure. Sounds like the only thing I would add to that, an amendment I'd add to that, Ben, is just in general, just writing a letter to the governor and also to ODA asking. I know there's some other components of this, the Chlorpyrifos bill, that some advocates I got a letter from some advocates asking if we would write a letter, to the governor and to ODA asking for them to have the utmost protections for farm workers. I think a lot of the what we heard today from Rose was really good. And at the same time, we always try and guide ourselves through a precautionary principle. So I think Jim's request to extend public comment is great. And in general, I think we should write a letter. So I'm 100% on board, but wanted to see if other folks.
Christina Higbee, I did note that, and I will definitely bring that to our leadership for consideration. Just to make sure that I'm clear, what is the extension timeline that you are requesting? Like, is there a certain amount of time, an extra 30 days to make it 60? What is it that you guys are requesting specifically?
I would say at least another 30 days.
Okay, so a total of 60 days?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. But again, I think we'll write a letter as well and send something to you formally. Do we need to vote on this? I know we got a motion from Ben. So I want a second.
Second.
Second by Bob. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. I'll work on a letter and send a draft around, and then we can pass it along. But in general, I'm committing to staying involved. I know Valentina already is as well in this and has been tracking it closely, but I've also been tapped by our advocacy partners to pay attention to this issue as we get closer and closer to the end of public comment period.
If I could add one more thing that came up yesterday, I mentioned Oregon OSHA has a open comment period around proposed protections and new rules. So I think those have gone out to the task force. I don't know, but I'll send them around. But I would suggest that we also provide some comment. I don't know, Valentine, if you want to speak to that from the Oregon Law Center perspective. I imagine you all are already engaged in some of that work. This is building on some of the COVID protections, particularly focused on workers.
Yes, thanks, Ben. So it is my understanding that there's, I guess we're still not entirely sure whether the new proposed rules would include farm workers, whether it would protect farm workers. As we know, the current temporary protection rule will be expiring fairly soon. I don't have the exact date. And so we just want to make sure that after that temp rule expires, we continue to have protection for our essential workers. But it isn't clear to me at this moment whether it would protect farm workers as well.
Yeah, and in the short reading, I came to the same conclusion, Valentine, that I guess we could argue that farm workers need to be explicitly called out or connected to those rules. So I'm happy to do some research. I don't know. Again, I'll make a motion, I guess, that the EJ Task Force develop and approve public comment from Oregon OSHA to Oregon OSHA's proposed new rules related to workplace protections.
If it needs a second, I'll second.
You're muted, Joel. You keep talking to us, I think.
Oh shoot, I hate being that guy. No, I was saying any no's or abstention. Okay.
Right, so I'll work, Valentine, I'll offer you, voluntold, as they say, but I'm happy to work on
Sure.
draft that really builds off the continuous work and conversations we've had around farm worker protections.
We also have Renee on the line, so I'm gonna unmute her. I think she has some points of information for us.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, task force members. Thank you for allowing me to kind of give you a little update on our rule. You are correct. The rule is out for comment. We are accepting comment through August 31st. It is, we're doing this as a temporary rule, which means it's a little bit more of an informal process at this juncture. Temporary rules don't get proposed by the Secretary of State like a normal rulemaking. So this is, we're taking the opportunity to get the information out and take people's comments through the end of the month. We anticipate having something in place the first week in September, and then having maybe another week before it becomes effective. There is some complications as it relates to how it relates to the agriculture rule, because when we adopted that in April, the agriculture rule can only be in effect for 6 months. And based on the requirements for the APA, we are not allowed to extend any of the provisions in a temporary rule for any additional time. We basically would have to go into permanent rulemaking. So it creates this complicating nature for us. At one point, we had thought that the temporary agricultural rule would expire on October 24th, and the rule that we're talking about right now for all workplaces would not go into effect in the agricultural community because of this restriction in the APA. However, now that we've gotten all the temporary rule put together, that's currently open for comment, it is looking like there's a lot of provisions that are not substantially similar to what is currently in place. So all the things that are not substantially similar will likely go into place for agriculture. So it is complicated based on how the APA describes temporary rules, and we're trying to work through that as quickly as possible. There are a number of provisions in our temporary rule relating to quarantine and access to the funds in the Family First Corona Act. So those kinds of things were not in the temporary agriculture rule because they didn't exist at the time. So those definitely would be applicable. So we're just sort of working through all the nuts and bolts, but now that we know at least the direction we think we're going, it seems more likely that it will connect to the same workers who were exposed in the first temporary rule. I will add that in the first temporary rule for agriculture, it only addressed field sanitation workers and labor housing workers. So people who were in the agricultural workforce that don't touch those two areas would already be connected to our temporary rule that we're developing. And I realize how complicated this sounds, and I don't mean to make it more complicated. It's just sort of the restrictions that we are operating under. It was important for us to get out a temporary rule for agriculture relating to field sanitation and labor housing immediately, long before we considered it for the greater workforce. And so we took that first stab back in April to try and give some protections for employees in that community. And then we've been working through the bigger picture for all employees in Oregon. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure that left you with maybe even more than what we started with, but there is at least something that I might be able to help work through as the questions arise.
Chair. So I don't mean to be obtuse, but I guess maybe if I'm hearing you correctly, then the new proposed rules in theory would cover all workers in Oregon without any specific carve out or exemption for example, agriculture. Is that correct?
That is what we are thinking it's going to look like. Right now, it's probably going to mean that we will adopt something in September, and the current agricultural rules that are on the books right now will be in effect till they die on October 24th. And then the rules for all workplaces will pick up that gap. There may be a few little exceptions to that, and that's because there are some things that are very, very similar. So one example would be in the temporary ag rule, we have provisions about facial coverings in vehicles. So the stuff that is related to all workplaces right now, we also have provisions for face coverings in vehicles. So that would probably be considered substantially similar, but there are abilities to make some adjustments. We just have to be farther than it's not clear what substantially similar means, so we can't be substantially similar. So we're just trying to be protective for all workers. There may be some caveats to it, but in general, it looks like everything is going to pick up after October 24th for all workers.
Thank you. Sounds like there's some more diving in that I'll need to do, at least personally. I don't know, Renee, if you can share that with Amira or Courtney to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to view the proposal. And then again, I'll volunteer to work with at least Valentine and whomever else to try to parse through some of those pieces.
Absolutely. I did send a couple links yesterday in the chat box. As soon as we're done here, I'll go ahead and get more information. It is available on our website, and we are taking comment through the 31st. So if there's anything that is striking or something that anybody wants to have further clarification, they're welcome to reach out to me at any time.
Sweet. Thank you. Okay, taking a look at this list of things. Does anyone have anything else they want to add to this list? I know we don't have much time, but I want to make sure that we're at least bringing up any other EJTF business that we need to be taking a look at or voting to the next meeting. Okay. In that case, we'll move on to our internal processing updates. I know this is something that Jim, you had put on the list for something for us to check on.
Right, I did. So maybe I've talked to most of you about these notes informally before the meeting, kind of figuring we're going to run tight on time, and this would be the most logical place to cut from. So I'll try to move through it quickly. The first thing I'd like to bring up is the item 1B, letter to the governor, or letters to the governor, since we just talked about sending one. And I'd like us to maybe flowchart that out to figure out how does it leave us, or say we've just made a motion to write a letter. How does it leave us? What's the review process? How does it get to the governor? And what's the feedback loop? Whether the governor likes or dislikes it, or the governor acts on it. And I think, rather than hashing out that flow chart now, I think maybe Joel, you and Amira, or, or Bob, as the administrators of the process, could flow chart it out. Because I think what I think we've kind of found out is that we've written several letters, but we don't have an audit trail. We don't really know if it got to the governor. We're not sure if we got a response. So I would think if we could flowchart and formalize that a little bit, it might be beneficial. And then we could have it and any of us could take a look at it and see where it is in the process. So just curious on people's thoughts on that.
I think that's great. I mean, I'm in the task force for it could be almost 4 years now, but you know, yeah, we sent a ton of letters, and sometimes we say we're going to send a letter and we forget, and sometimes we get something back, sometimes we don't. So I think this is great. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention and helping us get organized. But so yeah, I'd love to work on this and sort of a formal process on how we feedback our letters to the governor. But I'm curious to hear from other task force members. Other folks have any thoughts about this?
The only thing then that I might suggest is that we maybe, for setting up this process, that maybe we put a time frame, like to have a draft back to the task force on whole by X number of days or weeks or something like that, just so that we kind of have a timeline towards the accomplishment.
Sure.
So I guess my suggestion would be, Joel, maybe you and Amira could work that out and get it to us, and then we can all comment back. The other item that I had on the list, the first one was communication standards. And
sorry, Jim, I think Ben had a quick comment on that.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, just really quickly, I mean, I think that I love this idea. And I think that as we think about the timelines, you know, I think to the extent that we can, we should stick to that. But, you know, I think we just have an example now where it's, August 21st, deadline's August 31st. So just the nature of our meeting may require some quicker timelines in terms of turnaround for some of these things than we would like. So I think we need to, you know, set a standard that we aspire and try to hold ourselves accountable to, recognizing that there will be periodic, you know, moments throughout this work where that timeline will get shrunk based on the timelines of agencies. Having said that, of course, you know, being able to understand where, when, and how these things are coming out earlier and earlier will also help us kind of reach that aspiration and not rely on only getting this information at a meeting or only being able to talk about it at a quarterly meeting, which obviously limits some of our ability. So, you know, we'll have to work through that, but I appreciate your work on this, Jim, and really your vision for, you know, getting us a little more solid on this. So thanks.
Okay, so I guess, Joel, I leave that in your capable hands. But there's always going to be exception to any rule or procedure that you establish where timeliness is of the essence, and you just expedite and drop what you're doing. The second item that, is it okay to run on?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Okay, communication standards. I know that many of us are busy and in communicating. For myself, working with some of you, it's like some people say, you know, I'm not an emailer, I'm a texter. But what I'd like to ask us to consider is that if we get a communications from one of us or an agency advocate, because I've also had communications with agency advocates where they send information to us and they don't know if we've ever gotten it, or we don't seem to respond back that, yes, we got the information you sent and we'll get back to you with more questions. So what I'd like to ask is, could we adapt some type of informal policy or standard to where if we get a letter from somebody or a text, that we'll try to respond in X amount of time. And if we're busy, not with an answer, but just with, yes, I got your communication and I'll get back to you at such and such a time. I just think having some type of acknowledgement that an individual's in receipt of a communication and respond to it is important and respectful to the person sending the message. Now, I'm not sure, I know for myself, when I worked at the university at Eastern in the Student Affairs Division, we had a 48-hour kind of turnaround rule that if we got something from a student or a constituent, that within 48 hours, we would at least let them know we're in receipt of it and we will act on it in a kind of a nebulous time frame depending on the individual, next week, next month, whatever the case may be. But I was just wondering if we could consider some type of protocol like that amongst ourselves.
This is Bob. It might be, one response might be that we're too busy to respond to you at all, because we have very limited capacity right now. And if we have to respect nonprofits on a good day, some communities aren't even organized to that level, and judge them for not being able to come to our issues within 48 hours, that sort of chills our interaction with them. So there might be a list of responses, and we shouldn't take it personally. We're not all that individually important, that we just, they can't respond. And I've accepted this for 40 years working with communities, and I respect the lack of response in these communities. And so I think we have to sort of overlook, large organization administrative structures of communication and deal with our communities as we find them. And sometimes that means they don't want to respond, they can't respond for many reasons. And so I think between us, as you say, we should try to do that. But many of our members, thankfully, are grassroots community members and are subject to getting paid by the organizations and being responsive to the mercurial and rapidly changing impacts that we have on our EJ communities, given the COVID virus and the probably long-term economic impacts. I just want to be sensitive to that. I like the idea, but having worked with a lot of groups that don't have any leader representation, and then they're asked to reply within 48 hours, or what? And the or what is that they won't be involved and we won't have that input. So I'm very cautious about this. As between us, I can see it, but we have our chair and Huey and we have grassroots people here involved. And I think, to me personally, I always give them some slack. That I just wanted to be cautious about being too strict, and there's always exceptions. So thank you.
Anyone else have comments on this? I saw a suggestion from Mira too.
Well, and Ben, I see your thing with 1,500 unread emails. I think that's one of my biggest anxieties every day, is looking at the inbox and how long it's just going to take to try to stay afloat. But it is. Email, I think, is one of the worst inventions in the world. I used to love it when, you get mail by post once a day in the office. You get it at 10 o'clock and you'd able to process it by 10 the next day, but we don't live in that world anymore. So
I think,
no, we don't. Thank you.
I think in general too, just, it was rough before for us to respond in a timely manner. But now that we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and oftentimes folks talk about it's hard to work from home, but I think the reality is they're not really working from home. We're trying to work through a global pandemic, which is hard in and of itself. Now that we're in what feels like 10,000 year, we're in quarantine. But I'll just say too, I think a lot of this is a continuation of a long-term problem that EJTF has had, which is just a lack of capacity. And that was a problem before COVID, and now after COVID, everyone's stretched so thin. I think it continues to be one. But I like to also, I don't know, maybe get creative. I know organizationally, our team at CAFOs, we use Slack. So I'm not sure what kind of, I don't know if that's something that, the governor's office uses, or there's other quicker ways to get in communication with folks, and of course is compliant to, public records requests and all that good stuff. So that's the other thing that's always on my mind, is that, you know, we're also subjected to and to public records requests, and you know, trying to make sure that we're also you know, in compliance with giving due notice to the public, because we are a public body. So it's hard to do a lot of our work, you know, when we're not in official meetings anyways, just because if we have quorum, we have to send out public notice to people. So in general, I'd like to continue to try and figure out the best way for us to be in communication with one another. And at the same time, make sure we're in compliance with the laws that we're supposed to be in compliance with.
Thanks, Shaw. I'm gonna jump off, everybody. Thank you for all your work. You see,
Thanks, Ben.
Huey's got a future EJ task force member over there, so we'll have to do some future recruiting. But great to see everybody. Take care.
Seeing you too, Ben. So I guess from what I'm kind of hearing here is that we're all busy. We all acknowledge the workloads and the complications, but if we could maybe just, in our own minds, kind of just make a commitment to try to stay more on top of some of our communications within ourselves and our agency advocates, so that we're kind of keeping the workflow moving along. But I understand we're in odd times and we're all overwhelmed, and I just kind of wanted to bring that to our collective attention. And I think by doing that, I think if we're more aware of something, we may handle it a little bit differently in the future.
Definitely. Thanks, Jim.
So then I kind of had another one. I'll go on to D, the identify other committees, commissions that we are being asked to work with. Because as I look at our capacity issues, we seem to be being asked to work with more and more groups. So the question is, what other groups are we being asked to maybe serve on? I know with the CAFO, we had kind of a request for a one type of meeting thing, but I'm just wondering, you know, how have we expanded? Who are we all working with? What other requests do we have maybe pending to potentially work with? And how do we want to deal with that? You know, we talked about a proxy the other day, and maybe some of the meeting and situations. But just kind of wanted to raise the discussion of, you know, how do we address working with all the groups we're being asked to work with in a conscious way?
This is Bob. In the past, it's been a unconscious way, essentially, a catch as catch can. I've put myself at the biggest, hardest, most technical issues as being on tap, not on top with these things, and the best use of my expertise and time. There's a lot of other requests that look, if I wasn't part of this task force, look extremely complicated with DEQ and so forth. So people have volunteered, and if we had people, we had people. If we didn't, we didn't. And so we have about 4 or 5 requests, and then about 3 or 4 others, could you help us? And another 3 or 4 others, could you help us find someone? So there's 3 categories of reaction, and that's the past of how it's been done. Because it was a shorter time, and this is how we've acted, I do want to say, if the group is okay, I will wade into the DEQ 6 work group, technical workforce, cap and trade stuff. If someone doesn't want me to and wants to do that, contact me offline. But I didn't want to respond to Jim. This is really important. We got to figure out a way to do this. And we might have to say no to some groups for now. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, is there a repository or a place where we could share the requests that maybe come in? Because some of us might have, like Bob, kind of a background or an interest in a certain area. I can speak for myself. I think some of the time I'm not aware of some of the opportunities that might be available. So I I just don't know how does it come into the system? How does it get processed? And then how do people volunteer or be assigned?
Jim, I think that's a great point. And this goes back to, I think, the email glut issue we were talking about earlier. When we get requests or letters that come in just kind of in a big stream, it's easy to lose track of them. And as soon as it gets past that first page of to be read, it's like it doesn't exist anymore. So having even, and this is again, I keep thinking, man, so much of this could be aided by having a dedicated coordinator, right? But in the absence of that, perhaps there is even just a simple Google document that's like request to the commission where people can go in and sign up, you know, like, hey, I'm on this letter request. Hey, I'm on this work group. Or that way we can see what's unassigned. I mean, that might be a good temporary solution because, yeah, if it's up to me, just go back through my email to figure out what's being attended to and what's not, it's just not going to happen.
And Amira, I think you can advise us kind of some of the best way here because you're that switchboard for us. And you're already probably overworked, underpaid. So how can we all make your life easier?
Well, I love helping the task force as well. So I'm happy to try to figure out creative solutions and figure out what is possible given public meetings law and recording law or records law, public records law. And work with Courtney to see what is possible. And then trying to figure out what are some simple solutions, like Google Doc is a really great, simple way to figure out what members are currently doing and just to filter participation requests from other committees, agencies, community members, etc.
I think that sounds like a good idea. I think all of us probably have a Google address or a way to address Google. I know in some of the work that I'm doing, some people see Google as the big, bad, evil enemy, which they could be, but so they don't have Google accounts. But if we all have those, maybe I'd be willing to work with you there to try to look at, you know, setting up a system that might be able to address our needs. I don't know if there's really any system that can address our needs because needs of all groups are unique. But maybe if we look at some ways to enhance that, it will get us down the road a little bit further. And then if it doesn't work, we can learn from our experience and modify and create something new.
Yes, and a big part of this too, because the task force has been talking about just how to get better organized and produce systems that create some more efficiencies. And honestly, this pandemic has caused us to like really rethink how meetings are being held. And in a lot of ways, there might be some really simple, easy solutions that already exist that would make the way the task force works and meetings more efficient. And it's almost like with the pandemic, we're being now forced to use those tech advancements as opposed to, you know, going to a meeting location, meeting in person, and then recording notes in the old-fashioned way. Now we have more technology, so I'm happy to figure out how to use that so the task force can do their work.
That'd be great. And I know for a number of us, like we are on certain committees and we've been asked to participate in certain meetings, and you know, I sometimes will regularly go to, if I can, the other Advocacy Commission meetings just to pop in and say hi. But yeah, it'd be good, you know, Mira, to work with you and Courtney to figure out, like, can we figure out some sort of matrix, you know, or just a place where task force members can take a look at where we all are and just making sure that we're tracking work.
Chair, I'd
Yeah.
like to say that while we develop this new method, we have requests right now for our engagement. and we need to get people who want to places that need us. So we have a couple requests in there, and until we get this new system set up under time of COVID, is to go through the minutes, and I would suggest people find what they can do and see where they can go. I said it, we shouldn't, I've always said nothing for nothing, something for something. So if EJTF doesn't get a vote, we shouldn't participate on it. But we have all this DEQ issues. I wrote a list of them, and so they should be in the minutes. And if we can get those out, then right now, perhaps incorporating some of Jim's method is that if we're going to do it, we get it out. We say we want to do this. If someone wants to do it themselves together, collaboratively, or just themselves, they respond within 48 hours, so we can get our capacity to the grassroots level. And until that incorporates somewhat of Jim's, civics required in terms of our communication. But we do have people that came to us, and they're under capacity too, and the state agencies and so forth, and they need us. So they need us now. And so if every one of us could look at the minutes and see where they could best fit in terms of your time and energy or need for more information, and say so, send it out. If no one disagrees, we can just move forward and get our capacity to the community. Just a thought and idea though, but I'm interested in the DEQ, and it's not just going to be the 6 work group. I'm going to be at everyone. And I can do that, but if anyone else wants to do that, you have 48 hours to respond to me. So thank you.
Now, do weekends count? Are they business hours or regular hours? So no, but good suggestion, Bob. And I will do that, because I think there's 1 or 2 things that I'd like to maybe get involved in. And this discussion kind of then blends nicely into role clarifications, the next item. Because I'll speak for myself. I see Amira and Courtney, but I know there's other natural resource staff, and I hear them talked about a lot, but I'm not sure of our role or relationship with them. And then as we look at, the chair, vice chair, advocate members, I'm just not sure of everybody's roles. I don't know whether that's because I haven't done my own research, but I'm just wondering if some understanding of that, I'm personally speaking for myself, would have helped me better understand my role. So, because right now I feel like I'm kind of moving into organizational development and things like that within the group. But, I don't know whether that's within my role or not, or if I'm moving out of bounds. So I just took the risk, and like I usually do, and just barge in, and people tell me when you're not wanted. So I'm just wondering, what are some of the roles, and what are some of the clarifications we might want to do or not want to do? Sometimes creating roles and clarifying is dangerous, because then it kind of puts walls or guardrails up and limits people. And that's the last thing I'd like to do. But again, a lot of these questions, I just want to throw them out for discussion for our general benefit and edification.
This is Bob with the history of history, but the short history is we never even had a vice chair. And what has happened, we get grassroots chairs, which are great, but they have jobs to do. So I'm comfortable in the role of being on tap, not on top. So I live in Salem, I'm a retired professor, I know these issues. I'm glad to go to them. And the way the evolution of our inclusion is developing is that they invite the chair and vice chair to these natural resource agency meetings on climate change and racial justice commission. So if Joel can't make it, I go to that meeting. I do speak for myself, but I do not speak for the EJTF, but I share to the extent possible and try not to overload them too much with the chair about some of these hyper-technical issues. So it just organically evolved. And the ability of EJTF to put people of color in leadership positions affects our structure because of how it organically evolved because of my choice. And I'm not inflexible. I'm just trying to do everything I can possible to do this, but that's how it has evolved. And, you know, I think some role clarification might help, but it is limiting. And I have gotten in trouble in the past for going to the legislature and advocating very hard for the Clean Air Act Commission. Got 8 positions out of it. Some were supposed to be for EJTF, none were. So there's some, we're a state agency, so we are limited in some ways, just in that role. So I don't want any role limitations on the expression of EJ to power. And so I think it's good to get it streamlined, get it honest, straightforward. So when we ask the next chair and vice chair what the job entails, they know. Thank you.
Amir put something in the chat box, and I think it's probably a good idea. I mean, we don't really have a charter per se, but again, we're going to go into this 2021 session, hopefully with a bill to open up the ORS anyways. And so I think sort of having a parallel work in order to define some of these roles, along with the 2021 proposal to change the ORS, I think hopefully will put us in a place in which we can have some new responsibilities and hopefully a little bit more power, at the same time some more capacity and clear definitions of what we can and can't do and who's responsible for what. I got something here from Hui, says a member of right. Yeah, laying clarifications. It's true. I mean, as Hui mentioned, right? Like a lot of us are also advocates in terms of our day-to-day work, and so we have to have multiple hats. You sort of get to meetings sometimes, you're like, which hat do I have today? Is it as a community-based organization, as an EJTF member, as a private citizen, as a member of another advocacy commission? So, yeah.
And would there be times where I would have to like recuse myself on an EJTF agenda item because of another specific, you know, role I play as a ED of a community-based organization, you know? So I'm trying to always balance that and trying to figure out how not to step outside of that. And I know there's some, particularly like some of the legislative agendas that will emerge, and as we become hopefully a task force that has some additional responsibilities in the advising of, you know, different policies that might actually be able to provide recommendations or advance, you know, a support or non-support of an issue. And how do we balance that as a task force that has, you know, some restrictions, and then as community organizations that we come from?
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess that's something we can, as we, you know, this idea of the charter being loose and vague and not like bylaws, as Amira said, could help guide us in these things. Obviously, Rome wasn't built in a day, so neither will we. But these are all good things to put into that charter as maybe even just a header, and then something that we can work on as time progresses. I'm looking at the time, so I just kind of want to move on to another item or two before we conclude. One of the things that I found is the outreach to the agency advocates. You know, talked a fair amount with Candy Young of the OPUC, just because ran into her, and her son goes to school here at Eastern. So, you know, we've had discussions about her son, you know, so we've developed a professional and kind of a little bit of a personal one, but that's his background, is to, in chatting with her about how sometimes the advocates aren't sure what to come to us with or about. And she had mentioned that there was a point in time where some of the advocates would get together and have an email chat kind of about issues to maybe discuss and bring up. And that gave me the idea that maybe we could start some type of informal communications with them prior to meetings, asking them what are issues of concern to them that we could maybe help them with. So we're kind of reaching out to them and saying, how can we help you do what you want to do better? And sometimes, you know, people have asked, could you do a checklist or something like that? So I'd like to kind of ask, you know, how can we become maybe more proactive with the agency advocates to get input from them so we can maybe set up a half an hour discussion to be on a specific issue that's of interest to them. And I'd like to get thoughts on that. I see lots of heads nodding yes.
This is Bob. We've done this so many times in the past, and we hear the agency one year, we need to hear more from you. So we go out and outreach to them, and then we don't do anything. And now we have limited capacity. Some of the agencies that don't understand what's going on, this could be the high turnover of staff we've encountered by the people that become citizen activists. I'm very glad they're talking to each other. That was the intent of Senator Abel Gordley and now U.S. Senator Merkley when they set up this, is that the agencies could learn from each other what best practices were eventually. So I'm very glad they're talking to each other. It has been right in the legislation. So if they contacted their legal counsel for the administrative agency in particular, they could read the statute and they could discuss that. Also, we've always been open-ended. There's no checklist because we're not a checklist type of movement. There's no metrics because we deal with a lot of intangibles. So this has been very difficult for new people to the citizen advocate position to understand because they want to keep their job and they don't want to rock the boat. I think it's great that anytime the agency wants anything, there were years Robin and I would volunteer or perhaps threaten to walk up to their door and ask them to do their annual report. So, and it was very hard to get that degree of response. So Jim, I really welcome hearing that the agencies are doing this. It's a wonderful thing. It's really quite an evolution and very important. So thank you for that. But perhaps we're ready to take the next stage and adopt some of your ideas to more formally meet with them. Thank you.
We're of our time. Just want to check, Mira, is there anything else you wanted us to go over real quick, or should we just keep going on Jim's list?
Yeah, we can go through more Jim's list. Let me go back to the initial document that I was showing, because that had more of the items that were important. I was just gonna say that the last document I shared is a draft checklist that Jim has put together with some help from me and Miles a while back. And I'm happy to share that with the task force again and just see if there are any initial thoughts off of that or any other additional edits with Jim's permission. And then if it looks good, we can just kind of move forward with that being the meeting checklist. And then also I noticed in that document, I don't know if it was Jim or Bob who had suggested this, but having, with 14 agencies, maybe it would be beneficial to have it broken up so that agencies don't have to all go at once. It could be, like 3 or 4 going per meeting and just having that on the docket. And then if there are any pertinent updates that agencies want to share, maybe making just a request to be included on the agenda might be useful. But I haven't really quite figured that out, because I've noticed that every time we have a agency report, there's always like really good, useful information in their reports. And I would just hate for the task force to lose any of that, or for an agency to feel like the task force doesn't care about them. So it's kind of like a balance, of putting people on a schedule and also figuring out, how will the task force get information that that's up to date and relevant in the moment.
Definitely. We got about 5 minutes left. I know our list is long, Jim. Could you tell us what you really want us to talk about right now?
I think this is it. I'm sorry, Jim. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I think just probably this part could probably is kind of left to discuss, and then the rest of the document is the meeting checklist.
Oh, sweet. Like I said, in terms of the engagement with the advocacy commissions, I've been, at least since COVID started, been trying to go to each of the advocacy commission meetings just to say hi and check in and, you know, update folks a little bit on what we're up to, and also just listen in on what they're doing as well. I know that the advocacy commissions have their own annual meeting. So I think one of the things I'd like to suggest, or Mira, see if you and Saffron and other folks can work with Lucy or whoever Lucy's replacement is, you know, is there space for EJTF to join that yearly meeting, you know, just because we do have members of advocacy commissions on the EJTF. So we're already connected in that way. I know that they have their own office and we have our own thing, but again, I don't think it hurts to be more in communication and more in line with the work that they're doing, since it sounds like they're starting to dabble in more EJ stuff anyways, just out of their own accord.
Yeah, I think in some of my doing research on the advocacy commissions, and I think by design, we have members of those commissions within us. So maybe I'd like to suggest that we have a standing agenda item where the people that are in both worlds just give us an update on where they're at. Because as I've come to understand from a conversation I had with Ben, is the commissions are more legislative. That's why they have a representative and a senator on them. We're more executive. So if we can know what the commissions want to do from a legislative standpoint, we can maybe look at how can we, from an executive standpoint, smooth the road for that to go through, or find roadblocks potentially and let them know of them so they can take that into their analysis. But it seems like we were designed for that, but I don't really see that moving back and forth of information occurring that readily. So that's my 2 cents there. Just going on quick to public service, since I have 3 minutes. I did a sample letterhead that I put out and shared, but a couple of meetings ago, we talked about having a letterhead, potentially an email account, maybe name tags for us at meetings, and other items to kind of make it look like, you know, we are a commission. You know, sometimes we show up and, you know, we're there and we're somewhat scattered sometimes. So that was my my thought there. And I believe it was David who said that, David Tam, that the advocacy commissions do have business cards, email addresses, but I could have misheard that wrong. But so I'm just throwing that out there so that as we meet with our constituencies, our advocacy groups, you know, we can say, hey, here's my card, you can get in touch with me, rather than me giving them my Kreider consulting card, which, you know, has nothing to do with what I was at that particular meeting for.
Great suggestions. It sounds like Amir and Courtney are already working on some of these things, so thanks, y'all. We got about 2 minutes left. Just wanted to see if any task force members had any closing comments or anything they'd like to say before we end for the day. And thanks to Jim for continuing to push us to grow. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, thank you. But if I get in the way sometimes, let me know. It's part of this. The Kreider Consulting is doing organizational development work. So so sometimes I have to go like, okay, you can't treat, sometimes I go, how do I want to say this? You're not my client, but I'm a member of a group that I want to succeed. So I'm trying to find the in-between world there.
Appreciate it, Jim. Any last comments for any task force members? Feel free to unmute yourselves or put it in the chat.
Just a quick thank you to all the attendees that stuck it out with us throughout this 3-hour meeting on a Friday.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. A little more manageable to split up in 2 days versus 1 6-hour day. So, yeah, thanks, everyone, for blocking out 2 mornings to, and looks like we'll be discussing more things at our next meeting, hopefully in September, October. But yeah, everyone have a great weekend and we'll chat soon.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.